Hey everyone, I'm trying out a new style of video here today with my girlfriend Kat, who is not a hostage at all. Please say something so they know you're doing this of your own free will.
The date on this newspaper that is definitely in my hands says November 28th, 2021. I am Kat. I am safe. I am doing this of my own free will. You have to believe him.
And today, we'd like to discuss some of what we're reading and make some recommendations. This channel has always been about storytelling, and a huge part of my storytelling diet involves actually reading books, and more recently, diving into manga. So, at the start of every month, we're going to be telling those interested about the manga, novels, comics, whatever else we've been reading, with the hope of offering some guidance for those looking for a good read. As this is a new concept, we are still working out the kinks. If you have any suggestions to improve this concept to make it more valuable or entertaining for you, please let us know. For now, I'm going to be jumping into some manga, and then we'll get to the novels that we're reading. My experience with manga is extremely limited. The only one that I've really read extensively has been Hunter x Hunter, and I didn't want to jump into a super popular manga that is long running. Instead, I wanted to dive into some of the newer stuff being published in Shonen Jump right now to talk about some much smaller titles that might benefit from whatever small spotlight I can shine on them. That led me to two of the three manga I'm going to talk about now. Neru, Way of the Martial Artist by Minya Hiraga is an 18-chapter manga that began on July 5th of 2021 and just wrapped on November 15th after consistently placing in the bottom of Shonen Jump's rankings for the majority of its run. I think that this manga series teaches storytellers a lesson about not taking your reader's time for granted. Neru begins as a well-drawn but cliché shonen story about a boy who is talented in martial arts, who is unfamiliar with modern society, and is a bit dull but with a good heart. Beginning as a combination of Dragon Ball and Naruto, Neru isn't funny or unique enough to rise above those comparisons. Instead of beginning to flesh out why this story is unique, or build reader investment in the narrative with a clear goal, the story wastes its first 10 or so chapters continuously introducing new characters in random martial arts matches that made it truly difficult to follow along. However, around chapter 12, the story does begin to get a little darker, there's a generic but effective villain introduced, and hints at a larger antagonistic organization. A recently introduced and unique mentor character also gets some interesting development that wasn't predictable, which hints at a possible internal struggle for Neru himself. At the time, I noted that if the story continued to flesh out this dynamic, then the book could end up being something really fun. Unfortunately, it was too late. While I actually think the story continued to improve up until its final chapter, since the previous issues were so poorly received, Neru was destined for the chopping block. While Neru did begin to show some promise, this manga series is a perfect example of taking your audience for granted. As a storyteller, you need to give your readers something to cling onto, you need to constantly nurture their investment, or you risk losing them. Since Neru is such a short series, I actually would recommend checking it out if you have the free time, but only if you're interested in studying the tragic demise of a story that discovered its own potential too late. PPPPPP is a mouthful of a title that I always fumble through while trying to count the P's in real time. Based on this title, it's likely you'll still have no idea what this new manga series is about, but I don't know, I actually think the name is kind of charming. This story follows Lucky Sanada, the one sibling out of his septuplets that wasn't born incredibly gifted at playing the piano, and because of that, he and his mother are ostracized from the rest of the family. I wasn't sure how much enjoyment I'd get out of a series focused solely on piano playing, but while piano is the catalyst for the conflict, this story doesn't require that you care at all about piano to appreciate it. Lucky's story is driven by a surprisingly sincere dedication to simply improving oneself and rediscovering love for a lost passion. I've seen people online commenting that they think the art looks bad, but I disagree. I think that it's just different. While the character designs are just a little whatever, I think the clothing designs really shine. I mean, look at the detail on just these pants and that tie. Look at this girl's jacket. I enjoy the art, and I think everything fits well with the tone and atmosphere of this story. I also find that the visualizations of the piano playing is a unique concept that plays to the strengths of a visual medium. It may be hard to convey music through manga, but not when the music in the series creates visions for its listeners. PPPPPP is only at 10 chapters right now. It's an easy read to jump into if you're looking for something unique. The series definitely has room to grow, and there is a somber tone underlying the story that makes it different enough from your typical shonen series. The first chapter is about 4 times the size of the following chapters, so that's really the only hurdle to get across, but even then, I think that first chapter succeeds in establishing the foundation for this story. PPPPPP is a recommendation from me. Finally, I just wanted to briefly touch on Dragon Ball Super Chapter 78. The latest issue of this monthly manga just released on November 19th, and it continues the story of the Granola the Survivor arc. This is the first arc of the DBS manga that I've started reading, and I'm gonna say that while I don't think the story for this chapter was anything special, I think the art and the brutality on display were very refreshing. I'm curious where the mystery set up in this story will go. Chapter 78 serves as a good pivot point for the conflict in this arc. No spoilers, but if you aren't reading the Dragon Ball Super manga, but you're a fan of the franchise, so far, I believe the Granola arc is worth the read, even though it doesn't come close to anything that came in Dragon Ball or DBZ.
If you have a dark, twisted sense of humor and can handle a bit of grit and grizzle, A Certain Hunger by Chelsea G. Summers is my #1 recommendation right now, especially if you're a foodie like me. Dorothy Daniels is a New York City food critic with an unmatched palate for fine dining, great sex, and a little something unusual. Bopping between New York and Italy, as well as various men, she slowly begins to embrace her unusual appetite, describing each meal and man with the same elegant prose as her Michelin star restaurant reviews. What I love most about this novel was the uniquity of the narrator. Never in my life have I read a book from the point of view of a sexy, intelligent, badass, middle-aged woman, who also happens to be an absolute psychopath. Summers does an incredible job establishing Dorothy's sense of self, so much so that you start to forget how unbalanced she actually is. She's manipulative, conniving, and whip-smart, but delivers everything with this dry wit that makes you envious of her confidence and magnetism. When I was recommending this novel to customers at the bookstore where I worked, I would describe Dorothy as a cross between Hannibal Lecter and Miranda Priestley, which is both sexy and terrifying. Summers' satire of the gourmet, mixed with her charmingly uncanny descriptive imagery, make this novel especially noteworthy. If you want to be shocked to the point of nervous laughter, please read this book. It is dark and weird, and I promise you will not be able to put it down. Believe it or not, it may actually make you hungry.
Our Kind of Cruelty is a story about the lengths we'll go to for true love, told from the perspective of an absolute lunatic. Mike Hayes loves Verity. In this slow-burn psychological thriller, Mike is willing to do anything to prove his love. After they broke up, he's willing to move back home to England to be closer to her. He's willing to build the life they always longed for together. He's even willing to go along with her marrying a new man because he knows it's all part of a game they used to play. I really loved this novel. At first, it was a bit tricky to get into, but once you understand what the author is going for, it really becomes a fun ride as you continue down the rabbit hole, watching how the protagonist will manage to manipulate the truth to fit his reality when faced with damning evidence to the contrary of his worldview. Mike Hayes serves as a truly great narrator for this story, and I have to hand it to Miss Hall. She is able to put the reader so completely in Mike's perspective that his telling of the story makes it near impossible to fully understand the events around him, creating a sense of confusion that lasts through to the very end with no clear-cut answers as to what exactly Mike is wrong or right about. It's up for the reader to take what is presented through the lens of Mike and try and sort it out themselves in a way that still has the reader unable to distance themselves from Mike's opinion of events and the characters involved. If you like dark romances, psychological crime thrillers, stories about obsession told from the perspective of the obsessed, diluted with good intentions and just reasoning, I'd suggest picking this one up. At 272 pages in hard copy, it's a short read and worthy of your time if you're willing to step into the mind of a well-written, lovesick stalker.
So I've never been much of a science fiction reader myself, but I decided to take the plunge into The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin on a friend's recommendation and was so glad that I did. Le Guin is an absolute sci-fi legend, and I feel like this 1971 existential fever dream of a book was probably the perfect introduction to her work. Like many dystopian novels, Le Guin built upon many of Western society's pressing issues and anxieties at the time, hyperbolizing them into a world that feels so bizarre and unreachable, yet completely and timelessly relevant. Set in Portland, Oregon in 2002, the city is weighed down by overpopulation, climate change, and malnutrition, all while vaguely aware of a long-running war with the Middle East. Living in this nightmare is George Orr, a man whose dreams can literally alter the universe as we know it. Terrified by the increasing frequency of and complete lack of control he has in this phenomenon, Orr begins abusing drugs in an effort to stay awake at all times. This eventually leads him to William Haber, a psychiatrist and sleep researcher who attempts to control Orr's gift, essentially playing God and creating massive rifts in reality. This novel is difficult to talk about because of its complex and striking visions of a dream universe, which slowly begin to meld into the real world until it's almost impossible to differentiate between the two. In many ways, the reader must forfeit complete control and understanding in order to fully experience the story that Le Guin has layered upon itself. This notion is consistent with the title, which is, somewhat non-accurately, taken from the writings of Chuang Tzu. To let understanding stop at what cannot be understood is a high attainment. Those who cannot do it will be destroyed on the Lathe of Heaven. I could probably write an entire thesis on this novel, but I'll just wrap up by saying that this book made me think very differently about the world around me, which I believe is a decent marker for any good dystopian media. You genuinely will not be prepared for the absolute insanity that ensues, albeit beautifully articulated. If you want to be completely enveloped by a story while trying your hand at some Taoist philosophy, The Lathe of Heaven should be your first choice.
What You Did is the kind of story that needs to be handled delicately for risk of losing the reader's investment and the author's credibility. Fortunately, Claire McGowan manages to walk that fine line in this story about a rape accusation between the lead character's husband and her best friend. What You Did follows Allie, a well-to-do suburban mother who has begun a career in feminist opinion journalism and also serves on the board for a women's shelter, who decides to host a reunion of her old college friends in her new idyllic homestead. While the story is often unsubtle in its depictions of feminist thought, as an example, the feminist journalism is entirely superfluous to the story other than to establish that the protagonist, and by extension the author, get it. This story does create a mystery that isn't as clear-cut as both sides would have you believe. Watching Allie's idealistic lifestyle slowly cave in on itself after an avalanche of revelations is an entertaining enough read. While I think that What You Did struggles to get the reader on the side of the protagonist, the twists of the story are so well constructed that I had trouble putting this book down. I wanted to see if my own theories on what really happened, both on the night of the alleged assault and a night long ago, were even close to correct. This novel does a great job of keeping the reader on their toes with new information, and while I found that the character relationships were largely more told to the reader than shown, I think the family dynamic between Allie and her children served to ground what could have been a ludicrous, never-ending series of unfortunate events. If you're in the mood for a dark, college friends reunited after so many years drama, which seems to be becoming its own genre in recent years, with a dash of family tragedy, then I think you may just enjoy What You Did. And that brings our recommendations and reviews to an end. I'd like to thank Kat for joining me this month, and I'd like to thank you for humoring us both and checking this video out.
If you're a longtime viewer of this channel, it's been so nice talking to you again, and I look forward to the next time.
Like I said at the top, since this is a new style of video for the channel, I'd love to hear any feedback you may have to help us improve.
Also, please let us know if after this video you'll be picking up any of our recommendations. Feel free to leave your own too, we're always looking for a good read.
Take care of each other, and until the next video, we will shut up.